Hello, this is Dr. Antoinette Linton, and I'm presenting a presentation on lesson planning and learning objectives for my seminar class. This brief presentation will be an extension of what we were talking about last week with learning or lesson unit integrity. So we're going to dive into a little bit of lesson planning and how learning objectives come to be. So last week we talked about the steps in constructing a lesson objective informally. So this week I wanted to do a formal presentation on that. I have some steps here that we went over. We're going to choose the learning or performance expectation that the lesson will include and determine the epistemic practice that we will engage to meet the performance expectation. Then we're going to write out the process of performing the epistemic practice and meeting the performance expectation. So in science, that's modeling or engineering design, investigation, argumentation, and negotiation of expository text. Step three, we're going to make sure the lesson has integrity and that it is written so that students will understand what they are doing and understand what the end product is. So our students are always our audience. In step four, we're going to choose the last 2 or 3 lines of our process that we took our tools through and write the lesson level scenario or task. And then we're going to make sure to include the context. Step five, we're going to construct a lesson objective that includes the pedagogical component, which is the scenario or laboratory that we're working on, or model that we're building, or computer simulation, case, video, described event, reading, the epistemic practice students will engage in, the disciplinary core idea, and the cross-cutting concept components students will apply. Now, how do we include all of this in our lesson plan, and how does this um, end up being a learning objective? So what I took the liberty of doing was taking our last slide from our previous lesson, the world language, where we were checking for rigor. And so just to recap, this was the example that was used. What we were doing was planning out and using a lesson cycle. And this particular example has the 5 E's. You can see engagement, explore, explain, extend, and evaluate. And we're going to be focusing in on how to make a learning objective from a lesson that has been uh, designed using UDL, concepts of rigor, learning cycles, and epistemic practices. So this is the end product of taking a lesson through those 4 tools. And last week we said that the learning objective, it will be the last 2 lines of this lesson. So that's the extend, which is create a skit and use the translated conversation in the real world, and evaluate, come back and discuss what the challenges and successes were in your target language, and create a poster of the successes and challenges you had when speaking in the real world. So common features of a lesson objective states students will, and then you put in what the standard or the skill you're going to have them do in order to, or by doing something, basically a demonstration or produce a product. So the learning objective tells you the what and the how of what students are to be doing. So I took the liberty of making learning objectives from our last 2 lines of our example. So extend is the learning objective. So students will create a skit in the target language, that's the standard or skill, and then use that translated conversation in the real world, that's the demonstration or the product. The second objective would be from the evaluate. Students will discuss what the challenges and successes were in the target language, that's the standard or skill, and create a poster of the successes and challenges, demonstration of product, you had when speaking in the target language. So we just took the last two lines and put them in our learning objective framework. So once we have our learning objectives, hash out um, how important it is that we do this kind of final check, right? See if they are SMART goals and objectives. A SMART objective has five key characteristics. They are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and realistic, and time-phased. Specific. The learning objective should be well-defined, clear, and unambiguous. Instead of setting a broad or a generic goal, educators should aim to specify what the learner will achieve upon successful completion of the learning episode. Another way to think of this is to consider what the learner will be able to do or understand having completed the learning episode. What were the interconnected ideas that they will be able to use to solve the problems? What is the final action they will be taking? This is related to the epistemic practice you will be using. And what evidence of outcome do you expect the students to produce? In our previous example, the students were using the interconnected ideas of translation and conversation in the learning episode. And this is directed to the whole language epistemic practice of facilitating conversations. The two outcomes that the students will be producing are the conversation they are to practice in the real world and the reflection about the successes and challenges they had during the event. This is very specific, and if you follow the tools of the lesson integrity process, then teasing this out in your lesson should be easy to do. The next is being measurable, right? The objective must include criteria for measuring progress and outcomes. This ensures that the learner's progress can be tracked and that the effectiveness of the learning process can be evaluated. There are numerous ways to measure progress and skill development, including completion percentages, internal quizzes, and final assessments. You can make formal and informal rubrics and have students assess themselves on where they are in the learning episode. In our world language lesson, the measurable outcomes are the skit and the successes and challenges poster they will be creating. To extend our lesson objectives, we could put in our objective that the students would translate a 5-minute conversation into 100% of the target language. For the second objective, we can say that conversation dyads can name 5 successes and at least 2 challenges between them and create a poster with pictures, colors, feelings about the challenge, right? This could be a good time to note that the 5 E's that were used to create the lesson are not linear. You as a teacher might not uh, be linear in your lesson, and you can reflect that you want the students to enter back into the explain or the elaborate part of the learning cycle so that they can create solutions to the challenges they faced when they had their public conversations. Achievable, the learning objectives should be realistic and obtainable. While ambitious goals can be motivational, they should not be so challenging as to be unattainable, which might lead to frustration or discouragement of the students. This is where the social constructivism comes into play. One of Vygotsky's concepts was the zone of proximal development. The learning experience should be challenging but not discouraging. Students should feel accomplished, they should feel proud, intellectually stretched, and more like themselves than before the experience. The instructions and the activities should avoid being too lengthy or complicated, something I still struggle with myself, or the end goal can begin to seem unreachable. Realistic and relevant. The objective should align with the learner's broader educational and social goals, what brings meaning and enjoyment to kids in school. Being with their friends, feeling smart, giving them honest but developmentally appropriate work to do, that's why our anchoring phenomenon are really important. We can translate anything into science um, so that the kids can share with you what is meaningful to them and bring that into the classroom, link it to the learning. Time phased. This is the last component of the SMART goals and objectives. Time phased, each objective should have a defined timeline, offering a clear deadline for when the learning goal should be achieved. This enhances motivation and allows progress tracking over time. For me, I wanted the students to learn something well enough that they could do it with little to no assistance from me, and they could teach someone else how to do it if need be. This window was about 5 weeks. Remember, I'm teaching the content through the skills, not the other way around. So the students are constructing knowledge as they are being scientists. A unit was about 5 weeks. There were about 7 to 10 learning objectives, all of which could be completed within a certain level of mastery because they were developmentally appropriate and relevant to their lives. Planning as a contextualization process. Okay, so it is super important that we keep in mind that the planning process is contextualized. The planning process includes crosswalking the topic, meaning taking what you know about the subject matter, what the performance expectation is, and crossing that to what we want our kids to know and be able to do. When choosing an anchoring phenomenon and driving question, um, determine the learning objectives, the epistemic practices, and the lesson level performances. And finally, you want to build a coherent storyline and your unit plan. And within your unit plan, you're going to make your lessons. Now, this process is contextualized, meaning there are questions that every teacher should ask themselves as they go through each of the steps in the planning process. Expansion is the concept that learning experiences should lead to self-determination of the student based on what the student values and what is relevant to them. Intergenerational knowledge is the knowledge created between people of different generations. So this could be community knowledge and what children bring from community from their elders. This could be the knowledge between the teacher and the student, or an exchange of ideas between the teacher and the student. This could be an interrogation of traditional knowledge found in textbooks. First languages are respected and expected in the classroom, and the teacher plans the integration of language all throughout the learning experiences. Inclusion includes modeling fairness by being fair, kindness, promoting student agency, bringing in signs, sayings, and the sites of the community. Funds of knowledge are used as guideposts that recognize the diversity of experiences, values, beliefs in the classroom, making sure that students can use their talents and skills they already have. Culture is exchanged and recognized in the analogies, examples, and demonstrations that are used. And finally, equity includes all the supports, links to culture, language, values, practices you build into the lesson while giving students choices on how they will use the information they are gaining and the skills that they are developing in real life, workplace, family, social, or entrepreneurial experiences. It's a mouthful. That's why it's contextual. It's a contextualized process. Now, what I want to reinforce is that when you're learning teaching and learning planning, you can pick just one context at a time to work on. I'm not expecting pre-service candidates or new teachers to be able to put all of this stuff in their weekly lesson plan. You will be lesson planning for 24 hours straight, 7 days a week. But what I want you to do is take a concept a week and go, what am I going to focus on this week? How am I going to dive into this? What am I going to want to learn while I'm thinking about self-determination and expansion? Or how do I want to engage in intergenerational knowledge? Or what traditions do I want to bring into the classroom and share with my students, have my students share with me? How often do I give first language opportunities in the class? Let me focus on that and get really good with that and really comfortable. What about the talents and skills of students? How well do I know them? And what am I going to be bringing into the classroom? Uh, how am I going to link culture and funds of knowledge to my examples, my analogies, my demonstrations, my models, my videos, all the things that I do to engage students and hook them into the lesson. So you want to have like your own personal driving question because these are your phenomenon that you're investigating. So the kids are investigating science phenomenon, but you're investigating some of this educational phenomenon that we want to engage in. And like our JEIE video was stating, these are kind of the professional propensities. This is kind of JEIE at work, right? And when we do this over a long period of time, we become components and critical actors about direct action when it comes to educational justice, right? So we're linking all that in. Now, steps for anchoring activities and driving questions. So we're going to dive into this partly in this video and the next. So step one, we're going to review some resources recommended to develop an anchoring activity. I will be providing those in my Google Classroom. Then you're going to be developing a driving question for your uh, your lesson. Identify an introductory task, context, epistemic practice, and assessment for your anchoring activity. And then write your opening scenario or discrepant event or demonstration or case study, whatever you're doing to hook your students that they'll engage. So, lesson level performance expectations. This is something new. Lesson level performance are similar and informed to the performance expectations, but have a smaller grain size. They integrate the practices, core ideas, and cross-cutting concepts. They use only parts of the practice, core ideas, and cross-cutting concepts. So one lesson that spans a couple of days or even a week does not, kids haven't learned the mastery of a core idea or practice yet. First of all, we should be having kids engage in the practices all year. You know, effective communication should be happening all the time. Investigation and inquiry should be happening all the time. We are the D in the A through G requirements for the state of California. And some districts are still using that. Um, so we are lab-based, we are experiential based, we are engineering design based courses. So we're not teaching engineering design as a separate lesson and then moving on to something else. We're teaching engineering design because it's a core skill set that you're going to need throughout the school year, and we're going to be tying back to it all the time. So I need you to know it. And then we're going to describe what students will be doing in the lesson. So these are all the components for developing a lesson level learning performance. So let's talk about integrating practices, ideas, and cross-cutting concepts. So in your last class, in your methods course from last semester, you interrogated the science and engineering practices, the discipline core idea, and the cross-cutting concepts. And this slide here on your left is your science and engineering practice for an Earth and space lesson. And then you have Earth and the solar system as the disciplinary core idea. And then you have scale, proportion, and quantity as your cross-cutting concept. So in a lesson level performance, we're going to be using bits and pieces of this to make a lesson that makes sense to the kids so that they can learn why eclipses happen, right? So it says construct explanations for models. So the model portion of this science and engineering practice tells me that I'm going to be using my model epistemic practice here. And then I'm going to be using modeling to do eclipses um, of the sun and the moon. And then I'm going to think about scale, proportion, and quantity. So how I'm getting the kids to think is, okay, I have to use a model because I can't bring the moon and the sun down to earth into my lab in the school. So I want them to go, oh, that means we have to develop a model so that we can actually measure and understand this phenomenon precisely. So we're going to use a model of the motions of the earth, moon, and sun to explain how eclipses of the sun and the moon occur. So that's a really good lesson level learning performance. And what I really want you to really take away from this slide is that the cross-cutting concept states that you're using a model to study systems that are too large. So the motions of the earth, moon, and sun are too large for us to measure using traditional inquiry. So we're going to have to use engineering design and modeling for that. And then we're talking about time and space phenomenon. So to explain how eclipses of the sun and the moon occur, they occur predictably and they occur in space, right? Okay. How we want students to think about the science is our cross-cutting concept, is our scale, proportion, and quantity. We have to be intentional as science teachers about that. Learning tasks versus objectives. I think it is important to point out that there are two parts of prepping for lesson level performance. One, of course, is the learning objective, and the other is the instructions that you will be giving the students. In our Earth and space example, here's the task given to the students. Use a model of the motions of Earth, Moon, and Sun to explain how eclipses of the sun and the moon occur, right? This is what they're going to see in their instructions. What you're writing in your lesson is the learning objective, and that one is using a model of a system that are too large. Students will explain time and space phenomenon by, and you see asking questions, constructing representation, and testing the model for best fit. Those three lines are the epistemic practice for modeling. So you can have that as part of your learning objective so that you can guide the lesson. And so when I'm looking at your lesson, your weekly lesson, I'm looking to see if the epistemic practice that you've decided to use in your lesson is there and that it follows the lesson integrity stuff. That it's the each day and each portion of the days that you're writing across your week feed into the next and is cognitively building on one another. So if you're introducing a concept on Monday, I don't want to see that you're testing the model on Monday. I want to see you asking questions about the phenomenon and introducing the phenomenon and having them recall. By Wednesday, I want them to be building their model, right? And by Thursday, I want them to be testing it and changing it. And Friday, this is all hypothetical. And Friday, I want them to be arguing a best fit. I want them to be judging who's got the best model, right? So the order of the cognition is important, and it should dictate how you're writing your weekly lessons. Okay. Next, we're going to create the lesson level question the students will answer. And so, what is the lesson level question for our Earth and space objective, right? Hint, the lesson level question is answered by the learning objective. I'm going to say that one more time. The lesson level question is answered by the learning objective. So from the previous slide, the learning objective was using a model of a system that is too large, the sun, the earth, moon. Students will explain time and space phenomenon by asking questions, constructing a representation, and testing the model for best fit, right? So if the answer to the question is using a model of a system, it's like Jeopardy, right? Using a model of a system that is too large, students will explain time and space phenomenon, right? So the question is, how can we explain why we see eclipses and when we see them? I want you to marinate on that. It's like Jeopardy. You got to come up with the question after you've constructed your objective. So some things are just kind of out of whack. Like in your lesson plan, you see lesson level phenomenon and your lesson level question and all those things. But in the actual planning, it's more like engineering design. We deconstruct to construct. It's like a reverse engineering rather, right? So we kind of know what we're going to do, but we kind of have to go backwards in our planning so that we're very clear and uh, very clear about the integrity of the lesson and that all the component parts are there. So the questions basically last. Okay, so lesson level learning performance are similar to the performance expectations that you find in the framework, but they're smaller and you have to make them. You integrate the practice's core ideas and cross-cutting concepts, and you only use parts of them in your lesson. You describe what students will be doing, and you also contextualize the task in a way that is valuable for the students. So almost the very last step is that you are making your learning performance. You're going to write your learning performance, and this is what the kids see. So I cannot stress this enough. When you're writing a learning performance, you are not writing for an audience of teachers, you are writing for the kid. So this performance, this learning performance is written as if the kid is reading it or the kid is seeing it in your lesson that you're putting it on your smart board or you're projecting it somewhere or however you do it. So our learning performance for the babies is you are an astronomer who is charged with reporting when the next solar eclipse will occur. You are due to present your finding to the board of trustees at a major university. Your task is to create a model of the motions of Earth, Moon, and the Sun to explain how eclipses of the Sun and the Moon occur. Does that make sense? Please, pretty please put sugar on top. When I read your learning performance, I do not want you writing it for me as the audience. I want you to write it in the speak of the students. This is one of the hardest things for teachers to get their heads around when they're first learning how to do this. It's very interesting. Okay, points to ponder. Experiencing many individual activities does not ensure that students understand the overarching concepts about a topic that allow them to predict how a phenomenon occurs in a wide variety of circumstances. As a result, a major role of the teacher is guiding students' observations, reasoning, and understanding so that core concepts are grasped. Lessons and unit integrity built into the observations of reasoning and understandings of the students need to master the objectives in a developmentally appropriate way. Lesson level learning performances create meaning and value for the student. This concludes my supplemental lesson and video on learning objectives and learning performances. Please, if you have any questions, email me or hold your questions until we see each other. Take care.